We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 Here we are again. We're sitting down in our comfortable places to have a conversation. ABA, behaviourism, PBS, autism, the big conversation. We're lucky because people who are quite senior within the behaviourist community in the UK and Ireland are introducing their colleagues to speak to us. They do like it when they can introduce a person who is also autistic. So we have here, Theresa, an introduction from Alan Tennyson over in Ireland. It's a safe introduction. It's, look, a way of demonstrating to us and saying we're behaviourists, but look, there's autistic people out there. They're all involved in this. It's the safe way of introducing some to us. Pick out their autistic colleagues and send them over to Autistic Radio to talk to us. Hi, Teresa. Is that unfair?
Hello. Yes, I'm. Oh, well, I always worry whenever I'm asked to engage in anything about behavior analysis. Is it necessarily about my own views as an individual, or is it down to, well, here's our token autistic. We've rolled her out now for the special occasion, and by virtue of having her involved, we couldn't possibly be problematic. So I'm always aware, that's always in the back of my mind, that may be a certain amount of it. But frankly, I'll take it over never being heard. So the Lord give it, the Lord take it away, and I'll take what I can get in this particular instance.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And I don't blame them, really. It's not the only thing they're doing. They are coming and they are speaking at high levels. That's important. And it is relevant. It's really relevant that you are both autistic and a behaviourist, because some autistic people are going to find that a difficult two legs either side of a widening gap kind of idea. You've got one foot on the behaviourist boat that looks as though it's slipping away, and you've got another foot on the dry land. Does it feel like that?
It's a very uncomfortable Venn diagram at times, which, being autistic, I do like the math analogy, so I'll bring it in. But it is, I heard another autistic behaviourist once call it Middle Earth, that you're in this very unusual in-between space where a lot of autistics have some very relevant and appropriate critiques of behaviour analysis, so would therefore look at you as though you're some sort of a traitor to your neurotype. But then there's also the behaviour analytic community, where there's some people who will make some very ableist statements and will attempt to fix or cure, or are very in line with the medical model. So it like you said, it's like you're doing a very uncomfortable split, and trying to maintain where you are in that scenario without losing any aspect of yourself is quite a difficult one.
I feel for you, but I'm not going to concentrate on that difficulty because it's different here. We're speaking to people who perhaps hold some of the views that you've described eventually. And at the moment, the people who are coming to speak to us tend to hold, let's call them more progressive views. They're wanting to move the dial on ABA towards a neurodiversity inclusive practice. Am I reading the room?
Absolutely. There's been a very, very significant shift in the last number of years within Ireland in particular. There's a lot more discussion of neuro-affirmative practice, ensuring that anything that's put in place is validating of the individual and of their neurotype and doesn't come totally from the perspective of the neuromajority. So there's definitely a shift, but obviously these things take quite a considerable amount of time, because we're talking about years of ideas that impacts practice and impacts ideologies.
What's holding them back?
Fear. Nobody likes to be told that what they're doing is wrong. My major thing that I've noticed when speaking with other behaviourists is the tendency to go straight towards the defensive of, but I didn't do that, that's not me. And the issue that occurs when you get straight to the defensive is you're not actually really listening then to the concerns. You've gone straight into trying to protect yourself rather than listening towards the very constructive criticism that's occurring. And some people take the defensiveness and go then towards almost this, I'm definitely right, you're wrong sort of attitude. So I think it's the defensiveness. Nobody likes to hear anything negative about themselves. And depending upon how much somebody fuses with this idea of, I am a behaviourist, I am a behaviour analyst, if they hear anything negative about it, they have a tendency then to say, well, you're saying something negative about me, not about a discipline. So I think there's a lot of weird miscommunication that has occurred, and people ascribing the criticism to the field as a criticism towards themselves.
What you've described there, I would frame as a communication deficit.
Absolutely.
I would frame it as a disability.
Yeah.
If somebody is unable to engage with somebody else's idea intellectually because their emotions immediately make them go through patterns of behaviour, that looks like a pathology.
It definitely does. And it links in with additional criticisms of the science, including its rigidity, the need to always do things in a particular way, and learning trials should be at a desk. I've always found it to be quite ironic that part of what are considered to be behaviours that, as you kind of pointed out, would link in with pathologies or disabilities, are the cornerstone of why behaviour analysis gets an awful lot of very appropriate criticism, is a rigidity and very repetitive behaviour patterns.
I wonder if people can see the irony here.
I often feel like they don't, which is always interesting to me. I think a lot of autistic people, myself included, will engage massively in self-reflection and that self-awareness of, I did X, what does that mean? And I think once you have that label of I am this, you have a tendency to view yourself through a particular lens. And if you're part of the neuromajority, you may not do that to the same extent. And that can become a learned behavior of just not engaging in that reflection. So probably I would say one of the big changes that probably needs to happen within behavior analysis is learning that level of self-reflection and self-awareness, because that is a learned behavior. You can figure out how to do that, and you can enhance your communication skills to be more inclusive of lots of different communication styles rather than just using a singular approach.
The reason I've never criticised ABA or behaviourism is because I'm not well enough informed about it. I can only speak from my experience of being autistic in a non-autistic society. But what it would appear to be sometimes is that behaviourist principles that have been described appear to be an exaggeration of neurotypical behaviour. Does that chime with you at all?
Absolutely. It reminds me a little bit of overcompensation to some degree, of I couldn't possibly be this thing, so let's overgeneralize and do the behavior bigger and badder than what was originally considered.
It almost feels ideological rather than scientific. I know every time I speak to a behaviourist person, and you've done it yourself, the word science comes up. And science is an inquiry of questioning and then trying to find some kind of pattern in the results. But it doesn't feel scientific.
I think that's such a good point. With behavioral psychology, there's a very funny pattern that's occurred within psychology itself, trying to justify its existence, make itself appear more legitimate. It'll say science, science, science. But it's not the same as a science like physics or chemistry, where we're dealing with atoms and various chemical elements. We're dealing with human beings. And human beings, as soon as you're interacting with them, they will change who they are. You're different in a library than you are in a pub. You'll act a totally different way. So saying pure science doesn't take into account the very social element that occurs there. If you look at human beings, most of the way that society is down to social constructions of what human beings have collectively decided within that culture. Yes, this is the norm, this is the thing that we like. Within behavior analysis, there is an ideology. There's papers going back to the 1960s, the 1980s, saying this is what we are as a science. But actually, if you look at what they're saying the core dimensions are, some things of saying, the units of behavior that you're looking at are measurable. But there are also things like they must be applied. So they must be meaningful to the person. You can't just intervene on a behavior because you think it's fun or it's interesting. It has to be socially meaningful and it has to be valid for that person. So there is an ideology to it, absolutely. Anything where you're looking at human beings and you're meant to be linking in with their quality of life and who they are as a person and their ability to express that, there's not a scientific formula to that. That is an ideology.
I want to use an example, because it's a long way away, of the United States. And right at the outset, I have to say, everything is very far removed from me. It's such a vague impression I get. And I'm always willing to change my mind. The little I see about ABA in the United States looks as though it's linked to right-wing conservative thinking. It looks as though it's linked to fundamental Christian teaching. It reminds me of some of the excesses of the Catholic Church in the, let's call it the last century, to push it off further away from us.
Yeah, I do think there's something there around its link there, even with political ideology. Now, obviously, being Irish and being in an Irish context, I'd be more familiar with that. However, I have a lot of colleagues in America, I have a lot of friends in America. So I would be quite aware of that. And again, even when you're looking at, say, the model of autism and how it's being supported over in America, it's very much according to the medical model. It's seen as an issue, something that should be fixed or cured. The fact that therapies, supports, etc., for those who are autistic are provided through medical insurance indicates it to be that underlying idea of it's an illness, we should therefore cure it. And if you look at some centres that are using very questionable practices, they do have a lot of links with specific political ideologies and towards more conservative ideas of what is normative behaviours, whatever that means. I mean, who can really say what a normative behaviour is? It's extremely subjective. This is, again, why I'm saying you can't really say that it's a pure science, because as soon as you get back to human beings, you're thinking about all of the context that occurs, all the culture that occurs there.
But then we can have two politically alternative or rival sets of normative ideals, and the self-picturing as science has had a history of picturing itself so by the one side of norm defining that is the side it happens to be on or is being paid by, and there hasn't been a sort of scientific method check to say that consistency with both sides and not forcing the subject to go to one side's version rather than the other as a precondition of getting past the science label.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, coming back to this idea of society and the way that we construct things, we tend to be very strange and binary and say, well, you have to be one or the other. And as an autistic, we're very aware of actually we can have several fingers in lots of different pies. You can be a science, but you can have an ideology behind it as well. It's not one or the other. Again, when you're working with human beings, there's ethics around that. We know that there's lots of papers, hundreds of papers that says you reinforce a behavior, it increases. There you go. That's a science. That's causative. But then there's the ideology of, well, you can't just go and reinforce any behavior. That's really inappropriate. You have to check with the person to see if they're okay with learning that behavior and increasing that behavior. So it's not an either or. It should never be an either or. There should always be ideologies behind this thing. And that's where psychology has also had major issues over the years, is they started off first with the science and then had to play catch up in terms of having ethics boards, because they realized that it's not as simple as just merging sodium and chlorine and making some salt. You're dealing with human beings, and there's going to be significant social fallout from that.
Were the ethics boards any better balanced than the Supreme Court? I wonder if there would be agendas beyond them. So,
Well, that's always the question. Who exactly is on these boards and what interests are they serving? I'm going to bring up the Behaviour Analysis Certification Board because that's the one I'm very familiar with. They have a code of ethics, and I take major umbrage with one of them where they talk about the importance of informed consent. Now, I think hopefully anyone who's listening would agree and say, yes, informed consent, it's incredibly important. And it's a dynamic approach. It's not meant to be a singular point in time. However, not everyone is capable of providing informed consent based upon specific capabilities. But the ethics board, if you look it up at the BACB charter, they say to get assent where possible. Where possible. Not always, not as a matter of importance. Where possible. That's going to be very subjective depending upon the person. Now, if it was my ethics board, I would say get assent or don't do what you're going to do. So an ethics board is only as good as the people who are on it, essentially, and what their ideologies are and what their point of view is and their own learning history. I mean, like earlier, I'm an autistic living in a non-autistic world. Well, what impact does that have? And what sort of ideologies or thoughts does that have in the way that you're going to approach things versus a non-autistic in a non-autistic world?
I have the example of speaking with Andrew Swartfigger, okay, Society for Behaviour Analysts, and he's been very keen to ensure that that organisation has a way of including autistic people. But what I notice as a behaviour of the society is that all of the other necessary parts of an organisation, ethics boards, all kinds of different committees, were put in place right at the beginning. And if I go on the UK Society for Behaviour Analysts website, there's a space where the committee members of the committee that's supposed to be including the voice of autistic people has not yet been filled. There aren't the people there. It's an afterthought. It might be that there's one man who's enthusiastically trying to make it happen, but the behaviour shows that it wasn't right at the beginning part of the thinking. Is it different in Ireland?
I don't think so. I think definitely, even here in Ireland, there has been a level of afterthought in terms of the integration of autistic voices. Now, that obviously is not ideal. We'd love to be included and listened to from the beginning. However, the fact that people are actually listening rather than going into the defensive and saying, but we're not doing anything wrong. Sure, we don't need any autistic voices because, well, we know what you think anyways. it is starting to change. If you looked at it originally, no, there weren't autistic voices. The ethics boards, the various members of teams were not autistic. They didn't reflect any diversity of neurotype. However, we're now in 2024 and we're starting to see changes. Are they amazing changes? No, but they're the start of something. But we're talking about a really big, systematic cultural sea change, and something that is that big and that much of a cultural shift doesn't just happen overnight. It's gradual, and it does take several enthusiastic people to try to get it off the ground and have people come in on board. I wish I could say, as an Irish person, no, we're fantastic. We've never had any issues and it's all been brilliant. But no, I think most countries will have that afterthought when it comes to the neurodiverse population.
That phrase you said, that maybe some people who have influence in the behaviourist community can take the line, well, we already know what autistic people think, feels key to me. That's a dismissal of quite a large number of people based on their experience with a tiny number of people, based on their experience with vocal advocate groups and protest. So I'll tell you what we've decided to do. We've decided to turn the whole thing on its head. Instead of asking for a seat at other people's tables in general, we have created a table where other people are invited too. And we're inviting the whole of the behaviourist community. Everybody right from the top, the people who are happy to speak to us at the moment, the people with progressive ideas, and the researchers and the autistic people who are within behaviourism like yourself. But we're also inviting people right down at the coalface, the people who are dealing with autistic people in programmes on a daily basis, because they know. They are the people who are going to be able to explain this to me more fully and are going to be able to challenge some of my slightly provocative questions. Is that going to happen?
I think so. And I would worry about, for example, if we're putting out a seat at the table of behaviour analysis, that it's going to end up being very echo chamber-y of, oh, we'd only attract people who are very pro behaviour analysis. Whereas with what you're doing here, it's anybody who is interested in the topic, irrespective of where they fall on their views, they're welcome to discuss this in a respectful manner. And I think there's a lot more to be gained from that, because growth comes through being uncomfortable and hearing uncomfortable truth. And through channels like this, through forums like this, people can hear things better, or they get a more indicative sampling of what the more diverse population feels on these things. Because, I mean, if you're talking to people who are working with other autistic people, they've only worked with maybe 20, 30, 40 autistic people, but there's a lot more than 20, 30 or 40 autistic people in the world. By that small sample, you can't possibly get everyone's diverse range of opinions. So I think when you have a panel like this, where people can point out the harsh realities of things and be a bit more, yeah, they can be optimistic about things, but also engage in constructive criticism, that's where true growth can happen, rather than burying your head in the sand and pretending that everything is perfect and fine and let's just keep going the way that we are because it hasn't led to any issues yet.
I've always considered this to be a soft space. I can't say it's a safe space because I don't know what harm I might do by saying something to people, but it's an attempt at creating somewhere that's soft enough for people to be comfortable in. It's going to take away the excuse that we can't listen to autistic people because as soon as we go into a forum with them, they just come with their black and white ideas and they protest and shout at us. Because we're, with our behaviour here, completely demonstrating the opposite. So I would have thought from a behaviourist point of view, if you look at our behaviour, you should be able to take from that safety, an understanding that this is a safe place to speak with us. If they don't come to this soft space, what will that say about them?
And that's super interesting to me. I suppose safety in and of itself is a very subjective idea. You can think about it in terms of physical safety. You can think about it in terms of safety towards your self-esteem. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier. If somebody so completely fuses their idea of self with a particular discipline or with a particular ideology and they can't separate themselves from that, and there's any level of criticism that is kind of generated towards that field, they can take that on and assume that it's a criticism towards themselves, and that can make them feel unsafe in terms of self-esteem and their self-identity. As much as I love having a safe space, that isn't always possible. Couching terms prevents people from gaining that understanding of reality that we do need to grow. Denial is not healthy for anybody involved. We can't change and be better unless we know what the mistakes are. And again, sometimes it can be very difficult. It can damage your self-esteem to hear that you haven't done something right. So there are going to be people who aren't going to engage with that, and there's not a lot you can do. You can't force somebody to do something that they don't want to do. They have to assent to it. They have to engage in informed consent. If you start making people come to the table, you're going against the whole ethos of being inclusive. Option to come or not come, yes, but you can't make somebody engage if they don't want to engage.
To be included or to be invited to have your say is a good thing, but also feeling you have the option to not be included and not to have your say or not to be involved is definitely essential as well, and I totally agree. A lot of us do want to be at the table, a lot of us want to be included, a lot of us want to have our say and give views because there's so much out there that it can feel so demeaning and feels, in a personal opinion, it feels and seems so damaging because there's the approach that's taken by so many out there. You know, the methods, the approach of we are going to sort out the problem. We'll provide a service to sort out a problem, even though there may not be a problem there in the first place. It's just assumed, or it's just taken for granted, and that can be very damaging, not for just children, which obviously would be lifelong, but also for many adults who are feeling vulnerable, and they're vulnerable in many different other ways, and it just seems there's a lot out there that it's so harmful, and it doesn't just make you angry, it makes you really sad and upset as well, because a lot of people have been in that position.
There's another way of thinking about this. I do take the point that many people who have worked a long time in autism, just because it's over a period of time and they retain an old-fashioned attitude and some old-fashioned ideas and some things that are frankly no longer facts, doesn't mean they don't have something. Doesn't mean they don't have something to contribute. And it's not just about whether it's pushing them too far to ask them to come to this place that we make as safe as possible for them. It's almost as though we have to say to them, we pay you. It's my taxes that are paying for you to do your job. My feeling as a businessman is that if I'm going out creating products and services and then my taxation is going into a central pool and that central pool is out there to support people like me, then I do have an expectation that you should get slightly out of your comfort zone. Because otherwise, your profession is not professional. You're not doing your job correctly. Is that too harsh?
I can see the rationale there of having that be part of essentially job requirements. But we've seen a lot of job requirements change over time due to comfortability, etc. For instance, you once had to work on site. COVID happens. Now there's hybrid working and it's hard to get people back on site. It depends, I think, on who you're dealing with. Now, I'm a big advocate for choice. I think that even though it may be something that's expected, I am expected to go into work every day. That's part of my contract. But I don't have to. I have the choice every day to kind of decide, I'm going to call in sick. I've decided I'm not going to do this particular thing. And it's a fundamental human right to be able to choose what you do and don't do. And I think that when we're talking about a topic that is so entrenched in a history of a violation of human rights, starting off by omitting that level of choice and that freedom of self, that autonomy, may not be starting on the best foot. Modeling the behaviors that you want to see, providing choice, giving somebody the option to come or not come, to engage or not engage, may be more powerful over time than forcing somebody to do something. I mean, as a child, I'm Irish. We did a lot of Catholic masses and I was forced to go there to engage. I'm 34 now. I haven't stepped into a church in about 10 years. I don't have the best opinion of that. And probably because there was a level of, you have to come here. You're my kid. I expect you to do this. If you do the same thing to professionals of, you are a professional, we expect you to do this, you could end up with people going the complete opposite direction and feeling very resentful about it.
We mustn't certainly expect professionals to have great communication skills when there's autistics. For one thing, we don't want jobs to specify as great communication skills. Those who don't engage might quite fairly say that somebody else who has engaged speaks for them completely. Ethical accountability of work, they should be somewhere tied to an answer for why what they're doing is okay, when it's either with clients in person or with findings to be used on said, noted whether that's direct or indirect, they can have flexibility over.
I would agree. The accountability here is extremely important. Everyone should be accountable for their own actions. But again, if we're giving somebody the choice about how to manage that accountability, is it that they're getting up and speaking in front of somebody? Are they generating a report? Are they putting together a PowerPoint? Is it an email? Is it, a file that you've put onto Excel? Accountability can look very different, and we can adapt things to be inclusive of whatever that individual's needs are, because even professionals have their own things going on. So we have to be mindful of that as well. We're dealing with human beings, and everyone has their own rights and their own values and needs.
Comfort zones.
Thank you to both of you. I think you've changed. You've led me you've led me in a way that gives me the opportunity to change that rather blunt feeling that I have, that people should be doing their jobs properly because we're paying them, and if they don't do their jobs, employ somebody different. It will take a while for that to go ahead, because my experience is from being the employer and making judgments on who is appropriate for a role and who isn't. It still feels to me that there are a lot of people in roles who are not appropriate for the role, and the way other people will gradually come to judge people's fitness for their role is whether they do engage with autistic people in a fair way, and whether they do take on the burden of discussion with us. That feels as though that's how they will be judged. I will rein back on my jump to judgment, but it's a groove I've been in for a few decades now as somebody who creates businesses.
You're also going to have to be quite gentle with yourself, because change like that doesn't occur overnight. That's why I was even saying that most of these organizations didn't start with autistics in their role, and we're starting to get a foot in. And it's not going to happen overnight. Change takes a really long time, because to actually challenge your preconceptions, to interact with communities in a particular way, it does take time, and you're not going to learn how to do something new immediately. And I think, particularly being autistic, we have a very specific sense of justice of, well, this is the right thing to do, so why are we not doing this thing? And it can be that very, should we not be doing this immediately? But again, we're dealing with human beings, not atoms. We can't just fuse things together. We have human beings who have very specific learning histories. They have their own traumas. They've had their own experiences. And that is going to impact the ways in which they're going to engage with these processes. This is going to be an ongoing dynamic process, because even our idea of what is neuro-affirmative practice today is going to be different in 20 years' time, because that's something that should be co-constructed across populations rather than being dictated by a small few.
Thank you. Thank you for putting that all together and ending the program with that positive note. a long-term conversation, it matters that behaviourist professionals are people too. It matters that autistic people are seen beyond the medical model, and it matters that we are looking carefully about our own inbuilt expectations, prejudices. A long-term conversation, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Autistic Radio is personal and it's informal, which means that those taking part speak only for themselves. If they mention an organisation that they work for or they're a member of, they're not speaking on behalf of that organisation. We shouldn't take any implication from that. It's also the case that people's opinions change over time. So while this recording is there forever, people change.